Have you ever seen someone with money try to buy not just comfort, but a clear conscience? Today, in this courtroom, that's exactly what happened. It started like any other morning in Providence Municipal Court, the kind of day when the coffee on the clerk's desk was more interesting than the docket. Elderly drivers clutching envelopes, a young man in a work jacket twisting his cap in his hands, a mother whispering to her teenage daughter about, "Just tell the truth and we'll go home." Small worries, small fines, a familiar rhythm. Judge Caprio moved through the cases with the patience of someone who'd heard every excuse twice and still chose to listen a third time. The room hummed quietly, soft coughs, the rustle of papers, the squeak of a bench. And then the door opened in a way that made people turn, even before they knew why. She didn't hurry. She didn't need to. Joan Barkley walked down the aisle as if the room had been reserved for her, tailored coat still on, sunglasses in her hand instead of in her purse, heels striking the floor in an exact, irritated rhythm. Not just well off, visibly annoyed that she had to share air with everyone else. In her fingers, folded once and already creased at the corner, leżała powózka, a parking ticket she held like something that had accidentally stuck to her expensive bag. She didn't glance at it as she reached the front, just dropped it on the lectern with the casualness of someone setting down a receipt. A murmur moved through the benches. "That's Barkley's wife," someone whispered. "The gas stations?" "Yeah, those Barkleys." A man in a work uniform lowered his eyes. Another person shook their head, not quite surprised, as if the story had already written itself in their mind. On the bench, Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses and drew the paper toward him. For a moment, he simply looked at the name. "Mrs. Joan Barkley," he read slowly. There was the smallest pause after Mrs., a breath, a raised eyebrow, just enough of a gap for the room to feel it. Not fear. Recognition. He'd seen the name before. Joan shifted her weight, one hand on her hip, watching him like a customer waiting for a slow cashier. "This is a parking violation," he continued. "No parking zone, downtown. Fine is $35. She exhaled sharply, almost a laugh. "Seriously?" Her voice carried easily to the back row. "You think I care about $35? A few people in line glanced at each other. Somewhere in the second row, someone let out a low, "Wow," under their breath. The air changed, not loudly, but decisively. In that moment, every stranger in that room knew exactly whose side they were on, and it wasn't hers. Judge Caprio didn't answer right away. He turned the ticket over, then reached for another paper from the file in front of him. The cameras caught the subtle shift in his expression, curiosity edging into concern. "Mrs. Barkley," he said, his tone now more careful. "You submitted a single citation to the court, but the system shows 2 entries under your name for that morning." Her eyes flicked down for the first time, searching the desk. "I only got 1, she replied. "This one. Whatever else is there, it's a mistake." He glanced at the screen beside him, then at the papers, then back at her. "The time between these 2 tickets is unusually short," he noted. "The first violation and the written notice are only minutes apart. That's uncommon." He didn't accuse. He didn't raise his voice. But the word uncommon hung in the room like a question no one wanted to answer yet. Behind Joan, the line stood a little straighter. People stopped shifting, stopped checking their phones. The ordinary morning in traffic court was gone. In its place was something else. The sense that this wasn't just about a car in the wrong place, or a woman who thought she was above a fine. It felt like the very first tug on a thread that might unravel something much larger. Joan didn't wait for the judge's follow-up. She lifted her chin, folding her arms with the stiffness of someone who'd spent a lifetime negotiating from the stronger side of the table. "It was a busy morning," she said. "People like me don't track every little stoplight and curb." Her tone was flat, polished, the voice of someone used to being obeyed, not questioned. But there was something else beneath it, a faint tremor she tried to hide by tightening her jaw. Judge Caprio didn't rise to the bait. He simply asked, "What route were you taking that morning?" She blinked, a fraction too long, before answering. "Home. Then the office. It's all very routine. But the citation says you parked at the State House entrance." She waved a hand, as though brushing away a smudge on a mirror. "I had to run inside. Someone usually holds a spot for me, but the guy wasn't there. Not my problem." A soft murmur ran through the benches again. Joan heard it. She disliked it. Her fingers slid toward her phone, brushing the case, but she stopped short of picking it up. Cameras pointed at her from 3 angles. She couldn't text anyone for instructions or reassurance. Her thumb lingered on the edge of the phone a moment too long, betraying the impatience she tried to mask. Judge Caprio made a note on the file. "Have you had any prior issues with parking enforcement?" The question landed with the weight of a stone dropped into still water. Her shoulders stiffened, and for a split second, just one, the mask cracked. "I don't keep track," she said quietly, then added with forced lightness, "My husband handles that nonsense." Someone in the back whispered, "Handles how?" Another voice replied, "You know how." They didn't need to say more. The judge tapped a key on his monitor. The city database refreshed, and a small crease formed on his forehead. That single syllable made Joan's expression tighten. "There's a record of a violation from last year," he said evenly. "But it's marked administrative override. There's no explanation, no officer initials, no notes." Joan's pupils narrowed. "That's normal," she shot back. "People recognize me. They know I'm not some—" She stopped herself, realizing how close she was to saying something she couldn't take back. The judge waited. Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman leaned toward the man beside her and whispered, "Isn't she the one from the news last winter?" He frowned. "That thing at the Christmas lighting? With the loading zone?" "Yeah, that was her." Joan heard the whispering and flashed a sharp, irritated smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "What exactly is the issue here?" she asked, forcing confidence back into her posture. "I showed up. I'm being cooperative." But her voice carried an unmistakable edge, the defensive tone of someone used to being shielded from consequences, now realizing the shield wasn't in the room with her. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, studying her, not as a name on a file, but as a person. Something about her answers didn't match the bravado. The impatience was real, yes, but beneath it was a quick, restless energy, a kind of internal pacing. He spoke gently. "Mrs. Barkley, people who come here often tell me more with their reactions than with their words. You seem unusually concerned for someone who says this is just a routine mistake." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. Then, "I just have a lot to do today. That's all." But her gaze betrayed her. It slid sideways, toward the exit, toward a freedom she clearly wished she'd never surrendered by walking through the courtroom door. Judge Caprio moved the second citation to the front of the stack. "This other ticket," he said, "is from a different location, different time, very close together, but not identical." Joan's fingers curled over the edge of the lectern. "I told you," she snapped softly. "I wasn't there." The room absorbed her words with a heavy silence. The judge didn't confront her. Not yet. He simply set the citation down, neatly, deliberately. And in that simple gesture, everyone felt it. Whatever this was, it wasn't just irritation, wasn't just entitlement. There was something else she was working desperately to keep from surfacing, something that made even her confidence tremble. The courtroom had gone still, not out of fear, but anticipation. Even the people who'd been checking their watches were now leaning forward, sensing the shift. Judge Caprio slid a printed frame across the bench, a grainy image from a municipal street camera. "Mrs. Barkley," he said carefully, "this is your vehicle, correct?" She hesitated. Only a breath, but it was enough. The photo showed her SUV angled across a restricted zone, but not just any restricted zone. The blue-striped access lane beside an ADA ramp, the kind of place people don't block unless they believe they'll never be challenged. A man in the second row whispered, "That's the hospital side entrance." Someone else answered, "No wonder. The second citation exists." Joan drew in a slow breath, controlling it too deliberately. "That could be anyone's car," she replied. "Same color. Same model. You can't see the plates." But her eyes betrayed her. They flicked toward the timestamp. The judge didn't comment on the defense. Instead, he reached for another document. The second citation, the one she claimed she'd never seen. "It's interesting," he murmured, "how this one was filed. The time between the violation and the notice is unusually short, almost immediate." He looked up. "That suggests the officer either observed something urgent or was instructed to expedite the paperwork." Several heads turned toward Joan. Her jaw clenched. She said nothing. "And here," he continued, tapping the margin, "the location isn't downtown. It's on Hawthorne Avenue, near the medical district." Joan's eyes flickered. A quick, involuntary movement, like a shutter snapping too fast. "I told you," she said sharply. "I wasn't on Hawthorne." "You were on the State House steps 15 minutes earlier," he replied quietly. "Where were you in between?" Her mouth pressed into a thin line. A low rumble passed through the benches. Judge Caprio kept his voice calm, almost conversational. "Mrs. Barkley, I'm not accusing you. I'm trying to understand why there are 2 citations with such a narrow gap. It's unusual for our officers to be in 2 separate districts that quickly." He paused, then added, "Unless the violations were particularly disruptive." The room seemed to fold inward, leaning toward the fulcrum of his words. Joan swallowed, the muscles in her throat tightening visibly. "I'm telling you the truth," she insisted. "This second ticket, it's not mine. Someone mixed things up." But the insistence was too forceful, too uneven, as though she was trying to outrun her own thoughts. Judge Caprio turned the page and revealed another printed still frame, this time from a different angle. A white arrow painted on the pavement. The unmistakable outline of her personalized plate, partially visible despite the blur. The reaction was immediate, a sharp inhale from several people. Joan's hand flew to her forehead, as if steadying herself. The judge didn't attack. He didn't need to. "Mrs. Barkley," he said softly, "this image places your vehicle directly in a lane reserved for emergency services." Silence. Total silence. The kind that feels like the whole building is holding its breath. Then, in the smallest voice she'd used since entering the room, she whispered, "I don't remember being there." It wasn't an admission. It wasn't a denial. It was something messier. Panic threaded through pride. Judge Caprio leaned slightly forward. "Let me ask you something different then," he said. "Why did you bring only 1 citation today?" "I didn't know about the other one," she answered quickly. "But the notice was affixed to your vehicle," he replied, checking the officer's notes. "The log shows the officer documented it with a photograph." Her face drained of color. Someone in the back muttered, "She tore it off, probably." Another murmured, "Or someone did it for her." Joan's gaze darted toward the door, not defiantly, but fearfully, as though imagining someone waiting on the other side. For the first time, the room sensed something deeper than arrogance. A crack in the facade, a secret struggling not to come up for air. Judge Caprio sat very still. "Mrs. Barkley," he said gently, "when 2 stories collide, Yours and the city's. The truth usually sits right between them." Her voice wavered. "I didn't mean anything by it. I couldn't deal with it that day." "What happened that day?" the judge asked. And though she opened her lips to answer, no words formed. Instead, her silence filled the courtroom more loudly than anything she had said before. It was the moment everyone realized this wasn't carelessness. This wasn't entitlement alone. This was the first slip in a story she had been trying desperately to control. The silence barely had time to settle before a voice, steady but strained with age, rose from the back row. "Your Honor, may I say something?" Every head turned. A man stood slowly, leaning on a wooden cane polished by years of use. Gray hair, pressed flannel shirt, shoulders slightly bent. The posture of someone who had learned to carry pain without complaint. A small pin on his collar caught the light. A veteran's insignia. Judge Caprio nodded. "Sir, please come forward." Joan's head snapped toward him. The moment she recognized his face, the blood drained from hers. Her hand gripped the lectern so tightly her knuckles whitened. The man approached, careful with each step. When he reached the front, he didn't look at Joan. He looked only at the judge. "I was there," he said quietly, "on Hawthorne Avenue, the day of that second ticket." A ripple of shock passed through the courtroom, not loud, but collective. Joan inhaled sharply, a quick, panicked breath she couldn't hide. Judge Caprio folded his hands. "Please, go on." The veteran nodded once. "I'd had trouble breathing that morning. Heart trouble. My doctor told me to call for help if it got worse." He paused, steadying himself. "It got worse." His voice wasn't dramatic. If anything, too controlled, as if revisiting the moment tightened something inside him. "I called for an ambulance. They told me to stay near the door and wait. I opened it so they could reach me faster." Several jurors in the audience leaned forward. "When the EMTs came down the street," the veteran continued, "they couldn't pull in. A car was blocking the ramp, right across the access lane. They had to stop in the middle of the road and run." The room froze. Joan's breathing grew fast and shallow, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere far beyond the floor tiles. The veteran swallowed, his voice thinning. "I remember the driver. She stepped out of her car, looked at me standing there holding onto the doorframe, trying to breathe." He paused. "And she said, 'You'll be fine. Don't make this a scene. I'm late.'" A collective gasp flickered through the benches. Even the older woman in the second row, who had been unimpressed all morning, covered her mouth with her hand. The veteran's gaze remained steady, but the effort behind it showed in the tightness around his eyes. "I don't want trouble for anyone," he said. "But that day, I was scared. I didn't know if the ambulance would reach me in time. And he finally turned toward Joan, not angrily, but with a tired disbelief. She didn't care. Joan flinched as if struck. Judge Caprio rose from his seat, not in outrage, but in measured, grave attention. "Sir," he said, "did you file a report with the officer?" "I did," the veteran replied. "Twice. They took down everything. They said it would go into the system." "And you never saw a court notice?" "No, sir." The judge glanced at his clerk, then at the citation. The note at the top read, "Filed pending review." No signatures, no follow-up confirmation. Something was wrong. The clerk stepped forward and whispered something to the judge, unheard by the audience. But whatever it was made Judge Caprio's jaw tighten. Just then the courtroom door opened, and a staff member entered with a tablet in hand. "Your Honor," she said softly, "the body cam footage you requested." A wave of energy pulsed through the room. The judge tapped the screen. The audio filled the chamber, the static, the street noise, then a woman's voice, unmistakably Joan's. "Nothing will happen to you. Stop exaggerating. Move, please. I have an appointment." The veteran lowered his head. Joan closed her eyes, a single tremor running through her shoulders. Judge Caprio looked at her, not with contempt, not with anger, but with a stunned, sorrowful disbelief. "Mrs. Barkley," he said, "is this your voice on the recording?" She didn't answer. Her hands trembled at her sides. Her lips parted, but the words stayed trapped in her throat. The courtroom waited. Every person there, young, old, weary, impatient, knew they had just heard the truth laid bare. And as the judge set the tablet down, the weight of that truth settled over the room like a curtain dropping on the first act of a tragedy. The case was no longer about a parking violation. It was about a choice. One careless moment that could have cost a man his life. For a long moment, the judge didn't say anything. The courtroom didn't breathe. Then, with a quiet exhale, Judge Caprio straightened and folded his hands on the bench, not in anger, but in a kind of solemn resolve. "Mrs. Barkley," he said softly, "this courtroom sees many things. Mistakes, bad days, people under pressure. But what I've heard today," he paused, choosing his words with care, "is a different matter." Joan kept her eyes fixed on the wooden grain of the lectern, as if studying it could shield her from what was coming. "You told me you didn't remember," the judge continued, "but the body cam audio, the testimony, they paint a clear picture, not of a criminal, but of someone who forgot for a moment that their actions affect other human beings." Her throat tightened. The confidence she walked in with, the cool arrogance, the dismissive laugh, had evaporated. What remained was a woman trapped between pride and fear. The judge leaned forward slightly. "This court is not here to humiliate you," he said. "It's here to hold you accountable, the same way it holds everyone else accountable." Joan tried to speak, but her voice cracked before any sound came out. Then, unexpectedly, she managed a whisper. "I didn't think anyone would know." The room stirred. Not mockery, not outrage. A stunned sort of stillness. The admission wasn't dramatic. It was defeated, almost childlike in its honesty. The truth slipped out before she could rebuild her walls. Judge Caprio's expression didn't soften, but it grew more resolute. "I'm not concerned about whether someone knows," he replied. "I'm concerned about what could have happened. A man feared for his life that morning." The veteran lowered his eyes, his hands clasped around his cane, the memory clearly still heavy. Joan blinked rapidly, fighting the instinct to look at him, to acknowledge the magnitude of her choices. "I'm limited by the law," the judge said. "I cannot impose more than the statute allows, but I can decide how that statute is applied." He picked up the citations. "For the violation downtown, blocking a no parking zone, I'm imposing the maximum fine." She swallowed hard. "For the second violation, obstructing an emergency access lane, the fine is also the maximum permitted." 2 sharp taps of the gavel followed, not harsh, but final. The audience didn't cheer. There were no triumphant murmurs, only a quiet sense that something long overdue had finally been set right. But the judge wasn't finished. "There's another matter," he said, lifting the second citation. "The officer who filed this attempted twice to submit his report. Both times, it appears the documentation was delayed." A tense murmur spread. "I'm forwarding this issue to the City Council for review," he announced. "No report that concerns public safety should disappear without explanation." Joan's eyes widened, realizing the implications. It wasn't just her misstep now. The system around her was about to be examined too. "And finally," he said, "I'm recommending that you participate in our community impact meeting. There, you'll hear directly from citizens affected by careless or reckless decisions on the road. It wasn't punishment, it was perspective, the kind she'd avoided all her life. Joan's shoulders sagged, not dramatically, but with the quiet weight of someone who had been carrying a fragile illusion of invincibility and suddenly couldn't hold it anymore. The veteran met her eyes for the first time. He didn't glare. His look carried something far heavier, disappointment mixed with a tired hope that she might finally understand. The judge rested his palms on the bench. "Mrs. Barkley," he said gently, "you can rebuild from this. Many people do, but only if you face what happened honestly." Her lips parted, trembled, then closed again. She gave the smallest nod, barely perceptible, but unmistakably genuine. For the first time since she walked into the courtroom, she had no retort, no mask, no shield, just silence. And in that silence, the room felt the unmistakable shift. She was no longer untouchable. She was simply accountable. People in the courtroom began gathering their belongings, shaking off the tension as if waking from a long, vivid dream. The judge had closed his folder. The gavel's last echo was fading. Then, unexpectedly, Joan lifted her head. "Your Honor." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room like a bell. Everyone stilled again. She took a breath that trembled halfway in, bracing herself against a truth she'd never intended to speak aloud. "This isn't about the fines," she said. "It's about my husband." A ripple passed through the benches, curiosity tinged with something darker, more uncertain. Judge Caprio slowly sat back down. "I'm listening," he said. Joan's hands tightened on the edge of the lectern. Her voice grew steadier, though each word sounded as if it cost her something. "You think I acted the way I did because I'm entitled, and maybe that's part of it." She swallowed. "But there's another reason. If my husband heard I'd been ticketed twice in one morning, he wouldn't see it as my mistake. He'd see it as disloyalty, weakness." Her eyes flickered, not with theatrics, but with something raw. "I didn't panic because of the police," she said. "I panicked because of him." A few people in the back exchanged quiet, uncomfortable glances. Whatever they'd expected, it wasn't that. The judge's gaze steadied, his voice gentle but unwavering. "Mrs. Barkley, fear inside a household is a serious matter," he said. "But fear of a person can't justify ignoring the fear of others, especially someone fighting for their life." Joan lowered her head, her shoulders tightening around a confession she had clearly never dared to voice. "I know," she whispered. A long pause followed, the kind that lets the weight of a moment settle in without rushing to conclusion. "You have resources," the judge continued softly. "If you're facing pressure at home, there are organizations that can help, people who can guide you, but this court can't shield you from personal storms. It can only address what happened out there on the street." She nodded once, a restrained, almost fragile motion. "I understand," she said. And to her own surprise, she meant it. In the benches, the veteran shifted, watching her with an expression far milder than before. Not forgiving, perhaps, but recognizing that people are rarely just one thing. Not only the harm they've caused, not only the fear they carry. Judge Caprio closed the file with a quiet finality. "The matter before this court is settled," he said. "You have your fines, and you have my recommendation. What you do with this moment is up to you." He paused, then added, with a calm that resonated through the room, "Remember, Mrs. Barkley, fear of one person is never an excuse to disregard the dignity of others." It wasn't condemnation. It was a reminder, firm, dignified, and fair. Joan didn't argue. She simply exhaled, her posture less rigid, as if the truth she'd carried for years had finally cracked open. The judge rose. Court is adjourned. People began to stand. Papers rustled. A bench creaked. Life resumed. Yet the atmosphere remained strangely reverent, almost muted. At the doorway, as Joan stepped aside to let an older couple pass, someone from the waiting line whispered to the person beside them, "You know, sometimes court isn't about punishment. It's about finally hearing the truth." The words lingered like a quiet chord, and as the door closed behind her, one thought hung in the air, not spoken, but shared by everyone who'd watched the unraveling. What happens to her now? The story didn't end in that courtroom, but justice, at least for today, had found its mark.